ask just a few more questions with your indulgence. This testimony has been extremely valuable. And I should make clear, this investigation is going to be pursued by this subcommittee based on what you've told us today and other information that you may be able to provide us in the future. But I want to ask some questions about the broader national security implications of export controls. We focused today on American microchips that are making it to Russia, but insurance compliance with export control restrictions has larger implications all around the world, as I mentioned earlier. Mr. Spleeters, I understand that your work has traced American semiconductors found in Iranian and North Korean weapons, and you found that they're taking similar pathways to United States chips found in Russian weapons. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. We've very recently been able to open up a North Korean missile that was used in January against Ukraine, and we have found that a lot of those components were actually produced in the last 3 years, despite sanctions on North Korea.
And these paths are occurring after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, correct?
Yes, because those as I was saying, those components sometimes were produced in 2023.
And so would it be possible that Russian evasion of United States sanctions is serving as a kind of model for other possible aggressors and adversaries?
I think they might take lessons from it, certainly, but they have been doing it for a certain number of years as well. So, I think they see this as perhaps an easy path to go around export control. As long as export control is not made more effective, they will continue to do so.
Mr. Byrne, your organization has tracked a North Korean vessel known for violating international sanctions that made a cargo delivery, I believe, to a Russian port after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Could you provide some detail about that finding?
Yes, certainly, Chairman. Since August 2023, a number of Russian vessels, cargo ro-ro vessels, have loaded what we believe are likely thousands of containers of munitions from the North Korean port of Rajin and delivered them to Russian facilities in the Far East, where we believe they're shipped towards the front in Ukraine. So we now know, despite Russia's membership of the UN Security Council and its support of UN Security Council resolutions against North Korean weapons transfers, that they themselves are violating these resolutions and procuring not just munitions, but now ballistic missiles from North Korea and using them on European soil. It's incredible, it's egregious. Having done this for a long time, I never thought I would see this.
Would it be accurate to say that the trends that we're seeing in terms of the lack of enforcement, which is not futility, I want to emphasize, the failure to enforce law is not a sign of futility. We are not condemned to ineffective enforcement. We can do something about it. Would it be accurate to say that the trends we're seeing today could have larger implications for Iran as well as North Korea?
We are facing geopolitically a very dangerous situation. There's conflict spreading across the world. It is not just Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It is, tensions rising on the peninsula, Iranian activities, the Houthis' activities in the Red Sea. I mean, there's a huge range of problems. The convergence of North Korean, Iranian, and Russian interests in this war, the cooperation on the manufacture of weapons, the moving of Iranian factories to Russia to make these UAVs, the use of ballistic missiles, North Korean, that are now tested in Russia. These are all incredibly dangerous developments that pushes our enemies closer together. And whilst we have sanctions, whilst we have export controls, we have to do more on the enforcement of these cases. The North Korean economy for years has been externalized. Most of it exists in Chinese banks. That's where their money sits. Now we've heard recently that the Russians are unfreezing assets. We need to go after these banks. We need to go after these assets that the North Koreans have. The US historically has been very effective at this. The Department of Justice and the FBI, they've taken out a number of these North Korean networks, but we've taken our foot off the gas. And it's not just the United States, but in many other places. And we need to put our foot back on the gas, and we need to get after them.
We know how to do it, but we're not doing it.
Yes.
Ms. Rybakova, how reliant are U.S. export control systems on the compliance measures put in place by private companies? In other words, their record keeping, their, in effect, trying to know what's going on.
We are almost entirely reliant in some cases on the company's reporting. And that is a concern because it's always good to cross-check because we'll make mistakes, it's natural, right? Especially when the production happens outside the United States, it's then so much harder because the good never actually exits physically from the United States, and therefore we don't have a customs record that will allow us to cross-check what the company is reporting. So therefore it's critical to incorporate the compliance procedures in the companies that either on behalf of the United States company or license or joint venture is producing these chips, how the compliance procedures there work. And we as macroeconomists, most of the data is set up for macroeconomic analysis. It's unfortunately not set up for for analyzing how to clean up value chains.
So if a company takes the position or posture of the cartoon character, I don't know whether you're familiar with Sergeant Schultz, it may have predated your knowledge, but his favorite mantra was, "I see nothing." If a company chooses to see nothing or hear nothing, the difficulty of tracing and stopping this kind of violation of our export controls is all the higher, correct?
It's an extraordinary difficulty, and we have seen that in accounting and auditing, right? When an external auditor comes in and there are no internal processes, we're going to get a very inconclusive or very not clear report on the audit, right? Because a few employees entering a company and trying to find the individual item is almost impossible. We have seen in shipments between China and Russia, it's more than 20,000 shipments of just a certain type of a chip per month. In terms of the data sets of the companies sending components to Russia, it's more than 800,000 sort of in just 1 year, in a few months. So for a few hundred government employees that are responsible to control and implement and enforce all of export controls globally, because again, the US is a leader in this respect, it is not humanly possible to be able to do that without the internal culture change and compliance change within the corporate.
And the trends that we're discussing here, again, I've asked others about them, relate not only to Russia, but also Iran and North Korea, and as you point out in that op-ed published just today, to China, correct?
Absolutely. We see a lot of sort of new supply chain networks, distribution networks are registered in Hong Kong, in China, including in Hong Kong. There are some companies that sort of almost specialize in this business. There are some corporate secretariats that provide different shell companies, and if you close one, they open another. So we need to go again after this supply of the sort of alternative supply networks and distributors. And they work with, as my colleagues have pointed out, they work with Iran, North Korea, and now they're happily providing service to Russia as well.
You would agree, Mr. Byrne. I see you nodding your head.
Yes, 100%, yes. Hong Kong, in the case of microelectronics, Hong Kong is a particular concern. It's a large liquid market, it has a big financial industry, but so much moves through there, and historically on the North Korean side as well. But we've been looking at this for a long time, and Hong Kong has become very important for the Russians.
Senator Johnson, do you have any other questions? I want to just close by, again, quoting your op-ed. Quote, "We are at risk of undermining our sanctions if the private sector and malign actors learn that we cannot enforce new measures," meaning new sanctions, I think that is a critical piece of guidance, and we need to know that effective enforcement is key to our credibility all around the world, as well as Ukraine winning this fight. So here's what we know. We know that despite sanctions, semiconductors are reaching Russia, and they're used in weapon systems in a magnitude and scope that is truly horrifying. We know that these semiconductors are manufactured by United States companies, and they either know or should know what's happening. And we know that the sale of this United States technology to companies bordering Russia has increased drastically since the war in Ukraine began. Let me be absolutely clear. We're not drawing conclusions as to illegality. We have questions for the companies, not just those four: Intel, Analog, AMD, and Texas Instruments, but for others on this chart. We have questions for Commerce and Treasury departments, as well as for other United States agencies. We need to understand how United States technology is being permitted to fuel the Russian war machine. The sanctions imposed by the United States and its allies are not meant to be a sieve. They are meant to be an impregnable wall. We can't hope for perfection in enforcement, but the fact that 95% of the Russian weapons having these kinds of semiconductors and other parts and components come from the United States or our allies is a pretty devastating statistic. These sales have to be stopped. So we need more enforcement, more resources, stronger authority, more compliance, and more diligence on the part of the companies. Our preliminary observations suggest that we need all of it, not just one kind of action. The continued flow of technology to an authoritarian regime like Russia is emblematic of a larger failing with huge national security implications for the United States. And our failure here could have implications for Iran and North Korea, China, as well as others. So the struggle in Ukraine is about democracy, not just our democracy, not just Ukraine's democracy, but democracies around the world. Their fight is our fight. Enforcement of these sanctions is a part of that fight, and this subcommittee is going to do its best to get to the root causes of the failure to stop Russia's building of its war machine with United States semiconductors, chips, and other parts of components. I want to thank our witnesses again. You've been extremely valuable. The record in this hearing will remain open for 15 days in case there are additional comments or questions by my colleagues. And with that, the subcommittee's hearing is adjourned. Thank you.